Welcome into Training Camp Report presented by Ticketmaster. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith. We have a game to talk about. We are in the indoor. It is a good day, ladies and gentlemen. We are again back here, as you can tell, in the AC. This was not originally a practice slated to be in the indoor, and then anyone that has heard anything about or been in Tampa recently probably knows why we're in the indoor.
The heat?
I think that's why, I assume.
Record heat? I mean, I don't know. I looked at the forecast for this afternoon, and at 3 o'clock it was supposed to be 95 degrees, and that's just the straight temperature. Mm-hmm. It feels like it'd probably be around 110, so it just makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because this is a long practice. It's 2.5 hours.
Yeah, and I'm sure this is one of your last chances to get some stuff installed before you go do the joint practices that we have today, and then we have tomorrow as well, and we'll talk a little bit about that later in the show. But again, we do have a game to talk about a couple days ago, and there's a lot of new faces on this team after the last couple years where you brought back so many of the same people, and we got to see that first touchdown from a new guy to a new guy, and it's kind of some of that exciting promise of what could be some new additions to this team. There, you see the highlight here of Baker to Palmer, our draft pick.
Really nice catch, getting the feet down there.
That was beautiful.
And a really nice throw over the defender there. There was a very small window for Baker to get that pass in.
Yeah, that was a great play. And, of course, a top-notch celebration at the end as well. Really enjoyed that.
Well, neither Baker nor Kyle Trask got to play with the full expected starting offensive line. They didn't have Mike Evans or Chris Godwin. Russell Gage only played 3 plays. But both guys pretty much played with the same cast around them, the same linemen, most of the same pass catchers. So it was a fair playing field when you're trying to evaluate the two of them. Obviously, Baker got the start. The best thing I would say about that is he was 8 of 9, made a couple nice throws on the move. So it was a pretty smooth outing for him, got the touchdown. Kyle Trask, you saw maybe push the ball downfield a little bit more, which worked in a couple situations. And also one, he tried to fit in a little too tight and got intercepted. But you saw sort of the different contrasting styles of how the offense was run when those two guys were in. And speaking of great quarterbacks, Kurt Warner just walked right behind us.
Yep, and it's always fun to know why he's here now. Got a son playing, he's watching, making sure he's looking good. You talked about the quarterback competition, and John Wolford also had a pretty good outing while he was out there. And I'm springing this on you, so if you're not ready, we can talk about it another show. But we have not talked a whole lot about that new third quarterback rule on the roster.
Okay, yeah, sure.
And coaches have said a lot of things about Wolford, that he's looked really great, and we'd had Ryan Griffin on the roster for a long time, and it hasn't always been common for teams to have 3. Do you see Wolford as having made a case for this team, and with that new rule that these are going to be all 3 guys staying on this active roster?
So the Bucs actually have been carrying 3 for a lot of years in a row now, just because for the last 2 years, for instance, they had Kyle Trask, who they were trying to keep as a potential quarterback in the future, but they wanted Blaine Gabbert to be the main backup to Tom Brady. So it wouldn't be a big change. But what you're talking about is basically the league brought back a rule that they did away with in the early 2000s. And we used to call it the inactive third quarterback rule. So you have 53 guys on your active roster, and then on game day, back then, you had to make 7 of them inactive, but one of them could be the third quarterback, and he could actually play in the game if the other 2 guys came out. And then once he played in the game, the other 2 guys couldn't come back in. And so with some tweaks, that rule is back now. So it's kind of like the reason it's back, obviously, is that NFC Championship game.
I was say you might as well call it the Brock Purdy rule.
Yeah, so San Francisco's great season basically derailed with 2 injuries in a row to Brock Purdy and Josh Johnson. So that's why they finally did it. They've been talking about possibly doing it. And so that earlier this offseason, Coach Bowles was asked about that, and would that change their strategy? He said, very possibly, yeah. They just have to wait and see. So I think what you're saying is a valid point. John Wolford's sort of probably pushing them more towards keeping that third quarterback on the active roster. You cannot, you know how you get game day elevations of practice squads? You can't use that as a loophole. So you can't bring up a quarterback from the practice squad and make him a game day inactive and then use him. So you can't get around it that way. So if you want to have that third guy, he's got to
be on the roster. That's going to be interesting. All right, so again, back to our game. Some of the just big picture takeaways from it, I know one of them that Coach Bowles hit on, that basically everybody that came to the podium afterwards hit on, was too many penalties.
Of course,
and
yeah.
I mean, I'm sure it's not surprising in some ways. First preseason game, you're working some of the kinks out, but I know that they weren't okay with what happened, and that was kind of one of the biggest takeaways from the game for them.
Yeah, and some of those, you say, yeah, you're working it out, but a holding call is a holding call. Obviously there's technique issues when that happens, and what that masked to me was not only was it 12 penalties for 127 yards, that's a lot of lost yardage and drive hurting penalties, but it's also, there was hidden yards in there that was lost. So if you get a 15-yard gain, but it's called gain, but it's called back by holding. That's even more yards you lost. And to me, that's what made the Bucs pretty underwhelming rushing numbers. I think 66 yards, something like that. A little bit misleading because I can recall pretty clearly some nice runs that were called back on holding penalties. And maybe the holding penalty is the reason there were nice runs. I don't know, but the running backs look pretty good, and the structure of the rushing attack in our new scheme looked pretty good, I thought.
Yeah, and so what were some of those running backs and runs that really stood out to you and what that could mean for, I mean, we know Rachaad White, RB1, but we feel like the rest of that room didn't play in the game, so it gave a chance to see a lot of these other guys to figure out what that room's going to look like.
I know they're really high on Sean Tucker, and he had the touchdown run that was called back, and it was really nice the way he bounced it around the outside. But then I thought Keyshawn Bond, who started the game and got a lot of reps, had a couple really nice runs that fit in well with this scheme, this new zone scheme, where it's a little bit of stretching laterally and then hit a seam and cut quickly, which he's considered a good fit for that, and I think we saw a little bit of that on Friday night.
And just like we talked about, Rachaad White didn't play. You know, you had no Mike Evans, no Chris Godwin, no all these starters, which I'm sure some people watching the game were kind of bummed that there were so few starters out there. But it means you get a chance to see some of these young guys that are really trying to prove themselves. Like, we know what Mike is. We know what Chris is. We know a lot about these guys. We got to see a lot of these young wide receivers that I know you and I have really enjoyed watching and watching them try to prove that they deserve a spot here in this very crowded, talented room.
Yeah, and I think three of the guys that got a lot of playing time early with those other three out were Devin Tompkins, who's been one of the stars of training camp, Kalen Geiger, a similar guy in that he was an undrafted guy last year, spent most of the year on the practice squad, and he's kind of an undersized guy that still plays a little bigger. And then the sixth-round draft pick, Trey Palmer, who I think they're really excited about given his size and his speed and his production last year in college. But all those three guys played a lot. We already talked about Trey Palmer's touchdown, but another thing to note about those three guys is all three of them also got some reps in the return game as a returner. And that kind of gives you a little clue as what that competition's like, because that could be the deciding factor. You know, maybe Kalen Geiger, I'm just throwing it out there, proves to be the best kick returner. Well, maybe that gets him a spot over somebody else, or it gets him a helmet on game day over somebody else. And then in that same vein, Trey Palmer had a nice kickoff return. So, you know, I think that will help maybe break some ties when it comes down to figuring out who are the top six they keep.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. And then someone else I know I was excited to watch that is definitely not someone that maybe even all Bucs fans can pull the name out really quickly, but when he gets in there, makes an impact, is Cam Gill. Yeah. He's been hurt. We remember that he got that sack in the Super Bowl, which, I mean, what an amazing thing that when first one of your careers in a Super Bowl. And then we saw him come out and have a big game. He's another. We talked about how Shaq Barrett going to look coming back from injury. Cam Gill was the same question.
I came up to him in the locker room afterwards with that exact same storyline. I'm like, obviously everybody's excited that Shaq's back, but you're coming back from an injury. He had a Liz Frank, which is sort of like a mid-foot fracture injury. Those take a while to come back from. Fortunately, it happened it happened in the first preseason game, so almost exactly a year ago. And so he had plenty of time to recover, and he was ready to go when camp started. And yeah, he had that half sack in the Super Bowl, shared it with Ndamukong Suh, I believe. And then in 2021, he was your fourth guy in your rotation. So he didn't play a ton. He had a total of exactly 100 defensive snaps, but he did have a sack and a half and 3 quarterback hits, which you extrapolate into a normal amount of playing time is, you know, a good 5, 6, 7 sack season. So see him go out there in that game, get a sack and a half, and just really, you know, when Coach Bowles was talking the other day about how hard the decisions are going to be at that outside linebacker position, that's the kind of thing he was talking about. I mean, like you said, not a lot of Buck fans think about Cam Gill, but if you look on the depth chart, he's probably the 5th guy down. He's an NFL player. Yeah, that's so true. And then another guy that I was excited to watch in this game, because we've heard a lot about the improvement since last year, was Zion McCollum, that his cornerback coach, Kevin Ross, has said multiple times this offseason he feels like Zion could be one of the more improved guys on the team. He could take a big step. And I feel like we kind of saw a lot of the different elements of what Zion has been struggling with a bit, but then also where he's made the improvement that we saw early on. It looked like maybe that touchdown, you know, was given up around him, and, you know, we never really know who's supposed to do what. I think they called him out a little bit after the game for missing a tackle there.
Yeah, but then he gets an interception later in the game.
A really nice one.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you saw from him in that game.
It was just like you said. It was obviously a player who's improving, but some parts of his game are still a work in progress. One of those being tackling. Coach Bowles was saying after the game, or maybe the next morning, that he tends to be lunging too much. So these guys need to break down a little bit more so they're not susceptible to those last-second moves. And, you know, but the interception was a really nice play. One, because they've been talking about how he's made a big step forward mentally and recognizes what's going on. He read that play early on, judging by his comments afterwards, and really felt the whole way down as he was mirroring that guy that the ball was going to come his way. So he was ready for it, and he made a nice catch. So, yeah, you saw a lot of good, a little bit of the still needing to be improved, but again, that's a guy that I think could take a big step forward this year.
And one of the few starting jobs, if you want to call it that is up for grabs is the slot corner role. Again, whether you want to call that a starting spot or not kind of depends on what the other team does. But that is one of the few areas that really is totally up in the air at this point. It has been really fun to watch different guys get a shot at that. Did you feel like you got any insight in this game into who might be getting that role?
Yeah, it's funny because early on, during the first couple weeks of training camp, we kept seeing Christian Izien, who's a rookie safety from Rutgers, getting a lot of first-team reps in the slot. And there would be times in press conferences after practices that would be asked about, and Coach Bowles would say, hey, don't read too much into who's getting what snaps with first, second, third team, whatever. Don't read too much into that. Well, he started the game. And then after the game, Coach Bowles said, yes, he's the front runner for the job. So we have a little clarity there that I guess at this moment, while the competition's still going on, it's become Christian Izien's to lose, which is pretty cool. You know,
as an undrafted guy.
He's very much in the vein of Antoine Winfield. The same sort of body, not real tall, but thick and a good tackler, powerful, a good blitzer. You know, we'll see if it can translate to this level, but they like what they've seen so far. And he did play slot corner his entire last year at Rutgers, so it's not like he's coming into it blind.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. And I know earlier you brought up the wide receivers, that special teams could be a big part of, do they make the team because of a return job? There are other guys that special teams, you know, a lot of them ends up being, this is why they were able to get on this roster. And so it's always interesting to see at positions like gunner and some of these other jobs, who seems like someone that could really be standing out because of that role. And I know that you said Keenan Isaac is one of those guys.
Well, first of all, Keenan Isaac also started the game. The Buccaneers didn't play Carlton Davis or Jamel Dean, and so Zion McCollum was one of the outside corner starters, and Christian Izien was in the slot. And the other guy was Keenan Isaac, who's an undrafted rookie out of Maryland, I believe. And that may be Raheem Jarrett. I think I'm getting him a little confused.
Yeah.
But in any case, Keenan Isaac, undrafted rookie cornerback, started the game. But also, when you look at the play-by-play, you see 11 special team snaps, and that was tied for the most for anybody. So when you see that, you go, okay, if they're utilizing him that much on special teams, they really want to see if he can make an impact there. And that, like we said before, can be the deciding factor when they're trying to pick a fifth corner or a fifth safety, or, you know, or a sixth outside linebacker or something like that. So him, Servase Dennis got to play a lot as we anticipated, and Christian Izien did too. So there was about 5 or 6 guys that had around 10 or 11 snaps, and you look at them and go, these could be core special teamers for you.
Yeah, and then I know that another battle we've been watching that we sort of, I think, thought we'd get a little more clarity on in this game was the kicker battle.
Yeah.
Didn't end up getting a whole lot of opportunities to watch that. So do you feel like we're still sort of sid here in the wait mode to see what happens these next couple preseason games?
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I think they were trying to get one more look because who'd we play? The Steelers had the ball towards the end, and the Bucs called a couple timeouts in the last minute or so to get a punt. And I'm sitting there going, okay, it's a 10-point game. There's a minute left in the preseason. Why are we calling timeouts? I thought, you know what? They're kicking from near their goal line. We'll probably get the ball near midfield. I bet the idea is to try to get in range for a long field goal, to attempt a long field goal. Unfortunately, in best laid plans, Kalen Geiger fumbled on the punt return, and that was that. So all we got were a 35-yard field goal, successful by Rodrigo Blankenship, and then 2 extra points, successful by Chase McLaughlin. So hopefully there'll be some more opportunities in the next game, but also I wonder if we might have some scripted opportunities on move the ball drills next week against the Jets.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. All right, we're going to take a quick break here. We'll be back with more on Training Camp Report presented by Ticketmaster. For now, here's a Meet the Rookies.
This is Meet the Rookies.
Meet the Rookies.
Meet the Rookies.
Oh, this is y'all wait for, huh?
So I like to get a buddy or someone with me and sing "Party for Two," the Billy Currington and Shania Twain version.
Miley Cyrus, Climb.
Gunpowder and Lead by Miranda Lambert.
I gotta go Miley Cyrus, Party in the USA.
So sick of love songs. I overheard Boss saying Miley Cyrus ain't gonna lie. That Party in the USA, hey. Anytime that come on, hey, I'm the guy.
I played running back growing up. I was toting that thing too. You thought I was.
Ricky Williams.
I was fastest man in the school, so they're like, try out. So I just did it. I was just scared to get tackled like I am today.
It's like an embarrassing question for me. I was a center. I know I play linebacker now, kind of like a little skill position, like what it is. I wasn't even fat.
I always played quarterback growing up. I wasn't always this big, so up until I think my sophomore year of high school, I was a quarterback.
I was a kicker. In middle school, I was a kicker. In high school, so I can't kick no more though. Like, I was the biggest one on the team. I was the fastest on the team. So they put me at running back, we scored a touchdown.
When I started playing high school, I picked number 87. Everyone in my high school called me Gronk, so it was just a big tight end.
I was number 70 before all this. Now I'm 69, and probably a lot of you can guess the reason I like that number. It's just a goofy number.
They called me and said, what number you want? I said, just throw me in the number. I'm trying to play in the league. That's all I need.
High school, I wore number 13. I wore number 94 now. 9 plus 4 is 13. So that's something that I thought was cool.
Nighttime match. I had 3 in Nebraska, so I put 73 what they get you. 10, you hear me?
I feel like I swim pretty well. Like, I feel like I might not be Michael Phelps or something, but like I can swim pretty well. I at least get silver or something.
I always wanted to swim. I was in Michael Phillips. I was Trey Phillips, you heard me?
I'll probably say some in track.
I used to real deal hoop.
What's a little gold in the basketball love? Yeah.
Every time. Probably track. Probably run something. You know, there's a Haitian team. You know, I'm Haitian, so I can run for that.
Wrestling, I think if I train and put my mind to it, that's where my mind goes there.
With a little bit more practice, curling. I was in a curling league up in Fargo, so I'd say curling.
That's meet the rookies with the fellas and the guys and the crew, you heard me?
I have fun. I have fun.
Y'all are cool. Go Bucs. You're not going to do it? Rookies?
Welcome back into Training Camp Report presented by Ticketmaster. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith. Again, we are in the indoor today because it is the surface of the sun outside, and we are all very thankful for that. And it is one of our last true days of, I guess, what would be considered training camp, that we have the show today, and then we'll have a show again with practice tomorrow. And then we're going to go to the joint practices in New Jersey. We will do a kind of shorter, condensed, less fancy version of the show up there since we'll be on the road. But so today and tomorrow are the last versions of the show like this, which is crazy to us. We're already kind of towards the end of training camp, and I do feel like there are still a lot of things up in the air that is fun to watch for us, of position battles, making the roster, starting jobs. We know that Carlton Davis, Jamel Dean, those are your outside guys, but the cornerback position overall is still an interesting one, especially behind that and what it's going to look like between slot, your backups, making the roster. What are some of the big things that stand out to you about that group this year?
Well, you know, obviously the Buccaneers have invested a lot in their 2 starting outside cornerbacks, with both Carlton Davis and Jamel Dean getting big contracts over the last 2 years. And I think they're really, really happy with those 2 guys going into the season. You know, barring injury, they probably think it's one of the better cornerback duos in the NFL. And Jamel Dean, for instance, had a really nice week of practice leading up to this last game. Had several interceptions, one he returned for a touchdown, and he just seems he's already been very good. Some of the underlying numbers about his first 4 years in the league are surprisingly good, and I think he's probably not as well known around the league for that, although he was very highly coveted in free agency. After that, it seems pretty clear that Zion McCollum is your top reserve for those 2 outside spots. And then, as we talked in the last segment, Christian Izien at the moment has made the slot cornerback his position to lose, so we have him listed there. Now, interestingly, on the depth chart, he's still listed as a safety and probably will stay there. So that kind of gives you a little, when you're talking about how many corners do they keep, how many safeties do they keep, maybe you only keep 4 or 5 corners because
he counts as both.
You have a safety playing corner, and you have a couple other guys like D. Delaney, for instance, who have that same sort of versatility. And you saw D playing some snaps at safety in the game. But if you look at this, there's I think 9 guys up there. We did waive one today, Duron Lowe, when we brought in a new receiver, by the way, named Cephas Johnson, who had been with the Vikings, an undrafted rookie, played at South Alabama and Southeastern Louisiana, and actually mostly played quarterback. He was a big guy, like 6'5", 220, and has obviously some raw physical talents. So, but in any case, the corners there, Josh Hayes, they said did some nice things in the game. He's still in the running for the slot job and will probably play a lot on special teams. So I think you can easily find 5 guys to keep there that you feel pretty good about, especially if you include Izzy.
Yeah, and man, talk about that whole the more you can do, right? That when you're an undrafted guy, when you're showing you can, hey, I'll play corner, I'll play safety, I'll do whatever you guys need me to do. That's definitely a way to help you earn that roster spot. How about, though, we talked about how it's his job to lose. Do you feel like D. Delaney, how much does he have a shot at that, and what could his role be in terms of depending on how many guys you keep?
Yeah, D came here after bouncing around a little bit for the first couple seasons of his career. I think he's been in the league since 2018, but had only played a handful of games until he got here a couple years ago. And it may feel like he's been up and down, but if you look at it, he's been on the 53-man roster for the entirety of the last 2 seasons. And the big reason for that, I believe, is his versatility. He has played in regular season games at slot. He's played outside corner, he's played safety, and he's doing all of that again this summer in training camp. He's good on special teams. He's a guy that they trust. I mean, I feel like I would be a little bit surprised if he didn't end up with a roster spot, because when you talk about depth, they always talk about how valuable positional flexibility is.
So as we talked about, there's only a couple days left of truly what would be considered training camp. What is next on the horizon for the Bucs in terms of between now and the regular season, these next things up on the calendar, and what you think the big priorities are going to be of how they want to use that time?
Yeah, you talked about it already, going up to New Jersey to practice at the Jets training facility, and that's kind of the next big thing that we got going on. And coaches consider that to be really, really valuable work, because you can script so much. To the fact that coach said after the last game, when asked would some of these starters who didn't play in the first game, would they be playing in the second game, he says it depends on what kind of reps and what value of reps they get in those 2 days. And if they get enough, if Mike Evans gets enough, if Carlton Davis gets enough, they won't need to play him in the game.
This is why teams love these joint practices.
Everybody's doing them now, and I think they're just going to become even more and more popular, especially with the shortened preseason. And who knows, at some point the NFL might go to 18-2. So in that case, they'll become even more popular, I think. And it's just because you can get in so much scripted work, and then guys like to break up the monotony of having faced each other day after day for 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. And you talked about the scripting of game situations. It already feels like that's been something that the team has been able to do a lot of this camp, especially with the call-it plays and periods. That
True.
I know, especially you talked about that with Coach Canales on the Salty Dogs podcast, and just how helpful that's been for him as a play caller, which this last preseason game was his first time calling plays since his JV team that he coached. And it's great to see that it's situational, not just for the team, but for him for calling plays. And it does feel like it probably has made training camp feel a lot more realistic, even before these joint practices, as compared to these scripted times.
As long as you bring that up, play calling, by the way, I meant to mention earlier in the show when we were talking about the game, Coach Bowles revealed after the game that the defensive play calls were by Larry Foote, and that next week Casey Rogers is going to get them. And so Coach said, when asked, do you think you'll hold on to the defensive play calling yourself in the regular season? He says, I think so at the moment, but we'll see.
You know, it's so funny. I remember right at the end of last season, one of Bowles' press conferences to start the offseason, he was asked about this of, are you going to keep, the play calling, what are you going to do? And he mentioned he wanted to give those guys a chance during the preseason. And
now he is.
Now we see that he ended up following through on that, and that it's going to be great to give those guys a chance. They both are people that have absolutely earned it over a lot of time, have a lot of respect from this team. And I'm sure at some point it would be incredibly nice for Coach Bowles to hand that off, because you already have so much to deal with and think about as a head coach. But I'm sure it also is going to be a little bit hard for him that's like his baby that he's been working towards.
You know what else is a potential consequence of that is, these guys deserve it. You might be helping them get their next look at a DC position somewhere, and then you lose a really valuable coach. So you want them to get those opportunities, of course. But
selfishly, we're going to be like, if anyone else is listening, you heard nothing. These guys they're not calling anything. What are you talking about? I know that also something happening this week when they go up to the joint practices is Hard Knocks cameras will be waiting there. So it's a fun way to know that you ended up on Hard Knocks even without being chosen to be on Hard Knocks.
Did you watch any of the first episode?
I did, and I really enjoyed it.
It was enjoyable. I liked the part where Liev Schreiber, the narrator, came to practice. He's getting off the helicopter. He's like, should have ironed my shirt.
Should have ironed my shirt. Yeah, that was so great. And how much Aaron Rodgers loved meeting him. He was fanboying. He wanted
everybody to meet him.
Yeah, he's like, go talk to him. Go talk. I said it sounded like a parent trying to get their shy kid to come out of their shell. Like, go talk to them. Go talk to them.
You can talk to him.
That was so funny.
But my big takeaway was everybody up there loves Aaron Rodgers.
It's true.
They are all in on
They're
Aaron
all
Rodgers.
in. It's gonna.
Some of the guys are almost starry-eyed. He's like,
oh yeah.
Look look at what this guy can do.
I also loved when one of them, and it reminded me of when Tom Brady came here, that he was like, I've been watching you since I was 7. And Aaron Rodgers is like, are you age shaming me? He's like, no, I'm just reminding you how great you are. And you can tell Aaron Rodgers is like, yeah, okay, cool. I'm just feeling old. That's great.
Yeah, but the good thing for Bucs fans is if you are watching Hard Knocks, tune into the next episode, or probably the next episode.
Yeah,
right?
there'll be the one that coming out this week, and then it'd be the one after that.
You might see some cameos by our guys.
Yeah,
maybe
that's
there'll
going to
be a fight or something. Hope not. But
yeah, hope not. But it always makes for good TV there. All right, well, that's going to do it for us on this edition of Training Camp Report presented by Ticketmaster. Again, we'll be back here tomorrow morning for our final one of these shows before taking off for New Jersey the next day. So we'll see you tomorrow.